Hey, everybody, today, and welcome to today's podcast. If you're a new listener, welcome. If you've been here before, welcome back. Today, we're going to talk Georgia politics and specifically about the income tax here in Georgia. As many of you know, I am running for the state Senate seat District 21, that seat being vacated by Brandon Beach as he heads up to Washington to be our new U.S. Treasurer. And so far, we have 7 people running for this seat. We have 4 in Cherokee County and we have 3 in Fulton. Now, truthfully, there are only 3 people in the race that have a real shot at winning. The other 4 people are just going to burn a bunch of money and eat up a few percentage points of the votes. That is the reality in politics. Now, the 3 people that are contenders, my other 2 opponents are both running around with ads promising people that if they vote for them, they will help eliminate income taxes in Georgia. So, we've heard their promise, and today I want to break it down. Can we eliminate the income tax in Georgia? Now, the answer is yes, but actually no. You see, you can eliminate income taxes, but you would have to raise taxes someplace else to cover the shortfall. It's not like the taxes just go away and the state doesn't need the money anymore. The state still has to function. One way or another, you're going to pay some kind of tax. Call it whatever you want, but you will have to pay tax. The entire eliminate the income tax political promise is a hoax to play on your emotions. They think you don't understand basic math, and you will vote for their nonsense promises. But then again, isn't that politics in general? A better question is, can we lower the state income tax? And that answer is absolutely yes. In fact, in this episode, I'm going to show you how we can actually lower the income taxes to around 3.5% in the next 4 to 5 years. Now, a 3.5% income tax would put Georgia in the bottom 25% of all state income tax brackets of all the states in this country. It would actually be huge. It's about a 32% tax cut. And I today am going to give you the plan exactly on how to do that. Now, I do have to warn you that there's a lot of math in this podcast today, but I will attempt to make it as easy to understand as possible. So let's start with some baseline facts, okay? Georgia's revenue for the entire state is about $40 billion, and it has gone up significantly over the years. In 2012, for instance, our revenues were around $18.3 billion. In 2020, they had risen to $26.9 billion. And this year, they're around $40 billion. So in the last 13 years, our state revenues have doubled. Now, out of that $40 billion in revenue, that's the total revenue for the state, about $15.6 billion of that comes from income tax. That's about 40% of our revenue that we need to run the state of Georgia comes from income tax. But that's the thing that my opponents want to get rid of, or at least they're telling you that that's what they want to get rid of if you vote for them. So right away, if someone's telling you they can eliminate the income tax, I have to ask, where are they going to come up with $15.6 billion that we need to pay the bills to keep the state running? The money has to come from somewhere. 40% of our state will not just disappear. This no income tax pledge is a farce. It's nothing more than politicians telling you what they think you want to hear, and it's not real. And here's the worst part. Either they have hired a political consultant who is just pushing this message on their behalf that they know isn't true, and trust me, they know it isn't true, because they believe you're not smart enough to figure it out. Or the politicians themselves don't understand how running a state works, or how building and managing budgets work. And they're just repeating what they're being told to say to get your vote. In either of those cases, can you really trust them to be in charge of your money and your tax dollars if what they're telling you is impossible? Okay? So I told you I was going to show you a plan. A realistic plan to get our income tax down to 3.5% from its current rate of 5.19%. That's a 32% drop in our income tax. And that is actually huge. and it is doable. Now, it will be hard, and there will be a lot of politicians at the state level that will scream and throw tantrums and say the world is ending if we do this, but it is doable. This plan starts with the fact that we currently have a budget surplus of about $2 billion a year. That means we take in $2 billion more than we need to pay the bills. And this has been going on for a number of years. And in fact, the state now has, are you ready for this? We have $62 billion of cash in different funds. Now, most of that is being held for a specific reason. However, the state has $11.5 billion of what is called unaccounted for surplus, meaning it's just extra cash, $11.5 billion of extra cash. We also have about $5.5 billion sitting in an emergency fund that's required by law that we can't touch. So there's $17 billion. Now, typically what happens is when we get to the budget and we have this extra $2 billion, we end up finding ways to spend it, okay, on what we call one-time projects. And we in the state of Georgia are very fortunate to have this luxury. The governor, however, has made a decision that he also wants to give money back. In this year's budget, he wants to give back $1 billion to the taxpayers, and that is a positive. He also decided a few years ago to start lowering our income tax rate. And in fact, he has brought it down from 5.75% a couple years ago to its current rate going into effect of 5.19%. And his goal is to get it to 4.99. So overall, we've been making progress. Now, to get that tax rate the rest of the way down to the 3.5% I talked about, we have to understand that lowering the tax rate lowers revenue. And we either have to make up that revenue someplace else, or we have to cut expenses. Remember, the income tax rate of 5.19% brings in $15.6 billion out of the $40 billion that we have to spend. So for simple math purposes, the income tax rate of 5.19% is a tax on $300 billion of wages. To put it another way, everybody that works in the state of Georgia, all of our wages added up are about $300 billion. And then the state takes 5.19% of that out of everyone's paycheck, and that equals about $15.6 billion. That's the way it works, and that's where we stand today. If we lower the tax rate to 3.5%, the state would now collect 3.5% of that $300 billion in earned wages, and the state would only collect $10.5 billion instead of $15.5 billion. We will be short $5 billion of revenue. Now, if we were the federal government, no problem. We just print some more money, go into debt, and pretend like the debt doesn't matter. But we can't do that. In the state of Georgia, we have to balance our budget. So, to get to 3.5%, we have to find $5 billion to cover the shortfall, either in new income someplace else or cutting expenses. So for the purpose of this podcasting plan, we need $5 billion. First, remember when I told you that the state has about a $2 billion a year surplus, and we generally find ways to spend it on something? How about if we don't spend it? How about if we take the $2 billion and apply it to the $5 billion we need? Now I only need $3 billion more. Well, the challenge with that is politicians. And these numbers are so big, and everybody wants something, some pork deal or something for their district to get them reelected. There's always going to be something, and it's always going to cost a lot of money. The problem is too many politicians can't help themselves. They just need to spend that money. For our exercise today, we're going to have to tell them no. Stick to the budget necessities, and let's use the surplus $2 billion to help lower taxes. Okay? $2 billion down, $3 billion to go to hit our goal. Now, along comes DOGE at the federal level. And Elon rolls into Washington and in a matter of weeks starts finding fraud, waste, and abuse at massive levels. Now, to put this in perspective, the federal government has an office called the GAO, and it has 18,000 employees and a budget of $500 million. And on their website, they claim to have found $162 billion in improper payments in 2024. And you think, wow, that's awesome. 18,000 people with a $500 million budget found $162 billion in a year. Here's the problem. DOJ, with a staff of 100, not 18,000, and a budget of 28 million, last time I looked, not a $500 million, in the first 90 days has found or cut about $160 billion, about the same amount. And they say they can cut up to $1 trillion in 9 months. That's crazy. So that's at the federal level. Let's bring this down to a lower level. Let's talk Mississippi. Mississippi, I love this, has a $7.9 billion budget versus Georgia's $40 billion. And they have an internal DOJ team that they call MOJ, Mississippi Office of Government Efficiency. And their internal MOJ team found $400 million in wasteful spending. That's 5% of their budget. Now, if Georgia has a $40 billion budget versus their 7.9, and we enacted a DOJ initiative, and I'm going to call it GDOJ for Georgia DOJ, and we found 5% in savings, that would account for another $2 billion in savings against what we're spending today that we would have available to help lower our taxes. So we have $2 billion in surplus. We have $2 billion in GDOJ initiatives. We have $4 billion of the $5 billion we need to reach our target of 3.5% income tax. Now the question is, how and where do we find this wasteful spending? And I can tell you from my last 3 years on city council in Alpharetta that most of this is going to be in what are called legacy contracts that the state has with organization and contractors that are straight up getting rich on taxpayer dollars. This is everything from maintenance contracts to construction contractors to the consultants that we hire. And just to give you an example, in my city, last year we were given an annual renewal contract for software licensing for all of our employee computers. And when I broke the contract down, I found that we were about to pay for over 100 more licenses than we had employees in the city. Now, it's interesting because DOJ found the same thing at the federal level, except it was tens of thousands of licenses that nobody was using. To our credit, our city council caught this error, sent the contract back, and we cut tens of thousands of dollars in waste out of what would have been spent in our budget. Tens of thousands just on software licensing. We had another instance where the government, the federal government, our local House rep, wanted to give us a grant of $150,000 to build 3 bus stops. And it required the city to spend $120,000 of our local taxpayer dollars as a match for a total of $90,000 each for 3 bus stops. $90,000 for a bus stop. Basically 4 poles, a metal roof, and a bench. Once again, our city council said no. We turned down the grant money. Why should we add to the national debt? And we looked for other ways to get the job done. And you know what? Turns out a developer wanted to build a project on 2 of those corners and ended up doing those bus stops for us for free. And the 3rd bus stop we had donated, and it was built for $15,000. That's a savings of $120,000 Alpharetta taxpayer dollars on top of the $150,000 federal taxpayer dollars that we did not take and we did not spend. I can go on and on about money we saved by actually digging into contracts. We saved $100,000 on website services by just saying no, come back with a better deal. We saved hundreds of thousands of dollars on contractors. I will tell you millions on building construction for our firehouses. There are literally too many things to get into here. But Alpharetta had DOJ before DOJ was DOJ. And here we are, Alpha DOJ. Now, this same level of auditing, we need to do at the state. We have got to stop what I call the municipal retirement plans that way too many contractors are getting. They get in, they get a government contract, they massively overcharge, they make millions of dollars off the taxpayers, and after a few jobs, they can literally retire for the rest of their lives just by working for the city and the state. And it's because these companies and contractors and consultants, I got to be honest, they are shrewd business people, and they know how to play the government game. And most politicians are, well, let's just say they're politicians. They don't really have any experience dealing with business and contracts. Most of the time, if not all of the time, nobody that votes on these bills ever really looks at the cost details. They don't even know what to look for. And even if they did, they wouldn't understand it in the context of real costs. They don't understand how to save money because they don't think of it as real money. The numbers are so big, it's just numbers on a page. And if we have it in the budget, they spend it. And that has to stop. I remember being told early on in my political career that things just cost more in the government. And my immediate reaction was, no, it doesn't. It should not cost more. In fact, it should cost less because of the amount of business we do with these people. But the system isn't designed that way. It's not designed to be efficient. This one's crazy. This is one of the things I learned that blew my mind. There are actually laws in place in some cases. If we use federal money, we are not allowed as a city to get a competitive bid for the work. We're not allowed. We are only allowed to judge contracts based on a qualification scoring system called an RFQ, and then accept whatever price is given to us. It is absolutely insane, but that's how the government works sometimes. So, can we find 5% of fraud, waste, and abuse in Georgia? I 100% believe we absolutely can. But we need people with both the willpower to do it, no pun intended, my name's Brian Will, and the understanding of how to do it, and that is really the key here. We can't send someone to do something that has no real understanding of how to do it, okay? It's kind of like the 18,000 employees at the GAO versus 100 people at Doge. 18,000 people are probably good people, but they aren't the right people for this job. The right people will outperform the wrong people 1,000 times over. And even if we do find the right people, we need to be prepared to fight half the politicians at the state level, because you will be cutting wasteful spending that many of their friends are getting, and some getting very rich on, and they are not going to like it. Okay, so the goal was $5 billion to get to our 3.5% tax rate, a 32% cut in the income tax here. We got $2 billion from normal surplus. We got $2 billion from GDOGE. We need another $1 billion, and here it is. And I love this one. Have you ever heard of the Hollywood tax break? It's called film tax credits. It is not a deduction of income. It's a direct tax credit, real dollars that the state hands out. The film industry, or Hollywood, gets credit for contributing about $2.6 billion in spending in Georgia last year. We passed this law because it's intended to bring Hollywood in. They're going to spend a bunch of money, and then we get to tax it. And in fact, last year they brought in $2.6 billion, and we taxed it and made about $135 million. However, Georgia State University did an audit of the film tax credit program in 2023 and found that Georgia gave the film industry over $1.3 billion in tax credits that year. And remember, those are credits, not deduction. That is $1.3 billion of real money that they didn't have to pay us. So we collected $130, but we gave back $1.3. But here's the crazy part. They can't use all that $1.3 billion in tax credits. So you know what they do? They sell them to people like me and you. They sell them to businesses. They go out and say, hey, we have $1 billion in tax credits. We will sell them to you for $900 million in cash, and then you can claim the tax credits on your tax returns. So basically, they take our tax credits, they sell them for cash. This is kind of like getting food stamps and running down to the corner and selling them at a discount and taking the cash. That's exactly what's happening. They don't pay taxes, and they will go back to Hollywood with $1 billion of our money. We lose $1 billion to the film industry, to Hollywood, people who don't even really agree with us most of the time. And my question is, why are we doing that? Why are we giving them $1.3 billion when we only get $130 million back? If we only gave them credit for the tax dollars that we collected, Georgia would have another $1 billion in tax revenue available to us for our tax deduction. So you're not getting a tax deduction because that money is going to Hollywood. You let that sink in. So once again, $2 billion from surplus, $2 billion from GDOJ, claw back $1 billion a year that Hollywood is walking out the door with, and you got $5 billion. Now we use that $5 billion to offset taxes, and we have a 3.5% tax rate, a 32% tax rate cut for the people that live right here in the state. That's a real tax plan. That's a real goal. That's not a political talking point with no substance, and it is achievable with the right people at the state level. Okay, that's it for today. I hope you enjoy this episode. I'd love to have your support in my campaign. Let's get this thing done and let's make some real change for Georgia.